The frigid waters of the Snake River stole Hannah Lawson's breath as her body plunged beneath the surface, weighed down by the sodden fabric of her dress. Betrayal burned hotter than the icy pain as she fought against the current, her mind replaying the moment her own brother-in-law had pushed her from the bridge into the darkness below. Wyoming Territory, 1876. Hannah had traveled west following her sister's death, only to discover Abigail's husband had squandered her inheritance and saw Hannah as nothing but a threat to what remained. She hadn't anticipated the lengths to which Charles would go to silence her. Her lungs screamed for air as she clawed toward what she hoped was the surface. The moonless night offered no guidance, no mercy. Just as her strength began to fail, her head broke through, and she gasped desperately, filling her lungs with precious air. The current swept her downstream, battering her against rocks and fallen branches. Hannah fought to keep her head above water, but exhaustion threatened to pull her under with each passing moment. The cold numbed her limbs, making each movement more difficult than the last. A sharp pain exploded in her temple as she collided with something solid. Stars burst behind her eyelids, and darkness began to close in. As consciousness slipped away, Hannah thought she heard hoofbeats cutting through the night. The fog rolled in thick along the riverbank, transforming the landscape into a ghostly realm of shifting shadows. Beau Hawkins guided his horse carefully along the trail, returning to his ranch after a long day tracking strays. The mist curled around his boots and dampened his duster as he rode, the familiar weight of his colt at his hip offering its usual comfort against the unseen. 28 years on this earth had taught Beau to trust his instincts, and something in the fog tonight set the hairs on his neck standing straight. His horse, Merlin, sensed it too, ears flicking nervously forward as they approached the bend in the river. That's when he saw it, a pale shape caught among the reeds near the water's edge. Beau drew his revolver instinctively, then quickly holstered it when he realized what he was seeing. Not what, but who. Dismounting in a fluid motion, he splashed into the shallows, his heart hammering as he reached the unconscious woman. Her skin was deathly cold, lips blue, dark hair plastered across a face as pale as moonlight. For a terrible moment, Beau thought he was too late. Then he saw the slight rise and fall of her chest. Alive but barely. Working quickly, he gathered her into his arms, cradling her against his chest as he carried her to his horse. The woman was light, too light, and ice-cold to the touch. "You belong to me now," he whispered, the words escaping unbidden as he settled her before him in the saddle. Not as a claim of possession, but as a vow of protection. Someone had done this to her, thrown her into the river to die, and whoever they were, they wouldn't touch her again. Not while Beau Hawkins drew breath. The ride to his ranch seemed interminable, the woman's limp form growing heavier with each passing minute. Beau held her close, sharing what warmth he could, whispering encouragements though he knew she couldn't hear. Dawn was still hours away, and the temperature continued to drop. The lights of his ranch house finally appeared through the thinning fog, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Beau's ranch hand, Miguel, emerged from the bunkhouse at the sound of approaching hooves. "Mr. Hawkins, what's happened?" Miguel called, hurrying toward them. "Found her in the river," Beau explained tersely, carefully dismounting while keeping the woman secure in his arms. "Fetch Doc Williams. Tell him it's urgent." Miguel nodded and sprinted toward the stable to saddle a horse. Beau carried the woman into the house, kicking the door shut behind him. The warmth of the cabin enveloped them as he laid her gently on the sofa near the fireplace where embers still glowed. Working quickly, Beau stoked the fire, adding logs until it roared to life. The woman remained motionless, her breathing shallow. Her dress was torn and filthy, and a nasty gash marred her temple, blood matting her dark hair. "Stay with me," he murmured, wrapping her in blankets. "Just stay with me." Hannah drifted through darkness, occasionally rising toward consciousness only to sink back into the void. Voices filtered through the haze, unfamiliar yet somehow comforting. A man's deep timbre, steady and sure. Another voice, older and clinical, speaking of hypothermia and concussion. Pain throbbed at her temple, but it was the memory that truly hurt. Charles's face twisted with rage and greed as he pushed her from the bridge. Her sister's husband, the man who had promised to protect them both. Hannah forced her eyes open, blinking against the unexpected light. She was in a bed, a real bed with clean linens, in a room she didn't recognize. Panic surged through her until her gaze settled on the man sleeping in a chair beside her. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and several days' worth of stubble shadowing a strong jaw. His clothes were rumpled, as if he'd been there for some time. As if sensing her scrutiny, his eyes opened, warm brown eyes that widened in surprise when they met hers. "You're awake," he said, leaning forward. "How do you feel?" Hannah tried to speak, but her throat was painfully dry. The man quickly poured water from a pitcher on the bedside table and helped her drink. "Thank you," she managed after a moment. "Where am I?" "Hawks Ridge Ranch. My place." He set the glass down. "I'm Beau Hawkins. Found you half drowned in the Snake River 3 nights ago." 3 nights? Hannah's voice cracked in disbelief. Beau nodded. "Doc wasn't sure you'd make it that first night. You had a nasty blow to the head, and the cold." He shook his head. "You're stronger than you look, Mississippi." "Lawson. Hannah Lawson." She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I fell from the bridge outside of town." Something flickered in Beau's eyes, doubt, perhaps, or suspicion. "That bridge is 15 feet above the water, with railings nearly to my chest. Most folks don't just fall from it." Hannah looked away, fingers clutching the blanket. "No, I suppose they don't." Beau didn't press, though she could feel his gaze studying her face. "The doctor says you need rest. We can talk more when you're stronger." "Why did you help me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. A shadow of something pain, perhaps, crossed his face before he answered. "Anyone would have." "No," Hannah said softly. "They wouldn't." Beau stood, suddenly uncomfortable. "I'll bring you something to eat. You must be starving." As he turned to leave, Hannah caught his wrist. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, rough with calluses. "Thank you, Mr. Hawkins, for saving my life." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a spark of connection neither was prepared for. Beau nodded once, then gently extracted his wrist from her grasp. "Rest, Miss Lawson. You're safe here." The door closed behind him, and Hannah sank back against the pillows, wondering if that could possibly be true. Charles would be looking for her by now, determined to finish what he'd started. And she had nowhere else to go. The next few days passed in a haze of sleep and recovery. Doc Williams visited daily, checking Hannah's healing head wound and listening to her lungs. The kindly older man expressed amazement at her rapid improvement. "You're a fortunate young woman, Miss Lawson," he told her during his 4th visit. "Not many survive a dunking in that river, especially this time of year." "I have Mr. Hawkins to thank for that," Hannah replied, glancing toward the window where she could see Beau working with a horse in the corral. Doc Williams followed her gaze and smiled knowingly. "Beau's a good man. Best rancher in the territory, though he'd never admit it. Keeps to himself mostly, since losing his wife." Hannah's attention snapped back to the doctor. "His wife, Emily. Lovely girl. Fever took her 5 years ago." The doctor sighed. Beau blamed himself, of course. Was off hunting when she fell ill. By the time he returned. He shook his head. "He's never quite been the same." Hannah watched Beau move confidently around the horse, his hands gentle but firm as he worked. There was a grace to him that belied his size, a gentleness she wouldn't have expected from a man who looked as though he could break a person in half without much effort. "Well, you're healing nicely," Doc Williams concluded, packing his bag. "Another week of rest, and you should be right as rain. Though I'd advise against midnight swims for the foreseeable future." Hannah managed a smile. "I'll keep that in mind." After the doctor left, Hannah convinced Beau's housekeeper, Mrs. Hernandez, to help her move to the porch. The older woman fussed and muttered in Spanish, but eventually settled Hannah in a rocking chair with enough blankets to smother a bear. The crisp autumn air felt wonderful after days confined to bed. Hannah breathed deeply, taking in the stunning vista spread before her. Hawks Ridge Ranch sprawled across a verdant valley, bounded by the river on one side and rugged mountains on the other. Cattle grazed on distant pastures, and closer to the house, several horses occupied a large corral. She watched as Beau worked with a spirited black gelding, his movements sure and patient. The horse was clearly nervous, but Beau never raised his voice or made a threatening gesture. Instead, he spoke continuously in a low, calm tone that carried across the yard. "He has a way with them," Mrs. Hernandez said, appearing beside Hannah with a cup of tea. "The wild ones especially. They trust him." "I can see why," Hannah murmured, accepting the tea gratefully. The housekeeper studied her face. "He has not slept in his bed since bringing you here. First night by your side, then in the chair outside your door when the doctor said you would live." Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I've imposed terribly." "No," Mrs. Hernandez shook her head firmly. "It is good for him to care for someone again. Too long alone, that one." Before Hannah could respond, Beau looked up and spotted her on the porch. He said something to his ranch hand, then strode toward the house, removing his gloves as he walked. "Should you be out of bed?" he asked as he climbed the porch steps, concern evident in his expression. "Dr. Williams says I'm improving," Hannah replied, "and I needed fresh air." Beau nodded, leaning against the porch railing. The midday sun highlighted streaks of gold in his dark hair, and Hannah found herself noticing the way his shirt stretched across broad shoulders. She quickly averted her gaze. "That's a beautiful horse," she said, gesturing toward the corral. "Midnight found him running wild in the hills last month. He's coming along." Beau's expression softened when he spoke of the animal. "Mrs. Hernandez feeding you properly?" "She's determined to fatten me up," Hannah smiled. "I fear I'll need new dresses before long." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle. Hannah knew she needed to address her situation, but feared the conversation that must follow. "Mr. Hawkins," she began hesitantly. "Beau," he corrected. "Anyone I've pulled from a river gets to use my first name." A surprised laugh escaped her. "Beau, then. I need to thank you properly, and to apologize for the inconvenience I've caused." He waved away her words. "No inconvenience, but I won't pretend I'm not curious about how you ended up in that river." Hannah's hands tightened around her teacup. "It's not a pleasant story. Few worth telling are." He pulled up a chair and sat beside her, close enough that she could smell leather and horses and something uniquely him. "But I reckon I've earned the right to hear it." Hannah nodded slowly. "Yes, I suppose you have." She told him everything about her sister Abigail's marriage to Charles Winslow, their move west from Boston, Abigail's sudden illness and death 6 months ago. How Hannah had traveled to Wyoming after receiving a letter from Abigail written shortly before her death, expressing fears about her husband's behavior and begging Hannah to come. "When I arrived, Charles was charming, grieving, of course, but welcoming." Hannah's voice hardened. "Until I found Abigail's journal hidden beneath a floorboard in her room. She documented everything, how he'd squandered her inheritance on bad investments and gambling, how he'd grown increasingly volatile when she questioned him. Beau's expression darkened. You confronted him. I did. Hannah touched the healing wound at her temple. He didn't take it well, claimed I was delusional with grief, that Abigail had always been fragile and prone to fantasy. When I threatened to take the journal to the sheriff, She swallowed hard. He struck me, said no one would believe me over him. He's quite respected in Pine Creek. Winslow, Beau muttered. Charles Winslow. Owns that big house on the north side of town. Hannah nodded. That night, he suggested we ride to visit Abigail's grave outside of town, to clear the air between us. When we crossed the bridge, her voice faltered. He tried to kill you, Beau finished, his voice tight with anger. Yes. Hannah met his gaze. And he believes he succeeded, if he discovers otherwise. He won't touch you. The ferocity in Beau's voice startled her. I give you my word on that, Hannah. The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her. For the first time since Abigail's death, Hannah didn't feel completely alone. What will you do now? Beau asked after a moment. Hannah sighed. I don't know. I have a small amount of money, enough perhaps to travel further west. But Charles has Abigail's journal, the only proof of his crimes. And you want justice for your sister. Yes. Hannah's voice strengthened. I do. Beau studied her face, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once as if coming to a decision. Rest. We'll figure this out together. Hannah couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Unless you'd prefer to face a murderous brother-in-law alone? No, she admitted. I wouldn't. Then it's settled. He stood, towering above her. You'll stay at Hawks Ridge until you're fully recovered. After that, we'll decide what comes next. As he walked away, Hannah wondered at the strange turn her life had taken from near death to the protection of a man she barely knew but increasingly trusted. A man whose gentle care belied his imposing presence. A man who had whispered, "You belong to me," as he carried her from the river. The words had floated through her semi-conscious mind that night, and only now did she remember them clearly. Not a possessive claim, she realized, but a promise of protection. A vow that she would not face her trials alone. For the first time in months, Hannah felt something like hope. The following days established a routine that brought Hannah increasing strength. Each morning, she woke to the sounds of the ranch coming to life, roosters crowing, men calling to one another as they set about their work. Mrs. Hernandez would bring breakfast and fuss over Hannah's appearance, insisting she eat more to put meat on those bones. By the third day of her convalescence, Hannah was strong enough to help with simple tasks around the house. She discovered a comfort in domestic activities, kneading bread beside Mrs. Hernandez, mending torn shirts, arranging wildflowers in mason jars to brighten the kitchen table. Beau kept his distance during daylight hours, riding out early and returning late, though he always inquired after her health at supper. In the evenings, however, they established a ritual of sorts. Hannah would read aloud from one of the well-worn books from Beau's modest library while he cleaned his tack or whittled by the fire. Sometimes they talked of books and ideas, of life in the East versus the West, of everything except her sister's death and his wife's passing. Those topics remained untouched. Delicate wounds neither was ready to expose fully. 2 weeks after her rescue, Hannah was hanging laundry in the yard when Beau approached, leading midnight. The horse was saddled, though still skittish, tossing his head and snorting. Feel like getting some fresh air? Beau asked, a hesitant smile playing at his lips. Hannah glanced at the horse dubiously. On him. He needs the practice with a lighter rider. And you need to see more of Hawks Ridge than the house and yard. Beau patted the horse's neck. I'll be right beside you the whole time. Promise he won't dump you in another river. The joke surprised a laugh from her. Well, when you put it that way, how can I refuse? Beau's hands were warm and strong as he helped her mount, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. Hannah settled into the saddle, grateful for the split riding skirt Mrs. Hernandez had altered for her from one of Emily's old dresses. They rode at a gentle pace, Beau leading Midnight on a long rein while riding his own mount, Merlin. The valley stretched before them, bathed in golden autumn light. Aspen trees shimmered yellow and orange against the evergreen backdrop of pines. It's beautiful, Hannah breathed, taking in the vast landscape. Different from Boston, I expect, Beau remarked. In every way imaginable. She smiled. Though I find I prefer this vastness to city streets. They rode to a high meadow overlooking the ranch, where Beau spread a blanket beneath a towering pine. Mrs. Hernandez had packed a lunch: cold chicken, fresh bread, apples, and a jar of lemonade. As they ate, Hannah studied Beau's profile against the backdrop of mountains and sky. In the 2 weeks since he'd rescued her, she'd come to know him as a man of few words but deep feeling. His ranch hands respected him fiercely. His animals trusted him implicitly. And Hannah was falling in love with him, though she scarcely dared admit it to herself. "Penny for your thoughts," Beau said, catching her staring. Heat rose to Hannah's cheeks. "I was just wondering how you came to be riding by the river that night." It wasn't entirely a lie, though it wasn't what had occupied her mind at that moment. Beau's expression grew distant. "Had a feeling. Can't explain it better than that. Something told me to check the south pasture even though I'd just been there that morning." He shrugged. "Guess someone was looking out for you." "Or for you," Hannah said softly. His eyes met hers, a question in their depths. "How do you figure?" "Perhaps you needed saving as much as I did." The words came unbidden, and Hannah immediately wished she could take them back. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous." "No." Beau's voice was gruff. "Maybe you're right." A comfortable silence fell between them as they finished their meal. Afterward, they walked to the edge of the meadow, where the land fell away sharply, offering a breathtaking view of the valley below. "I bought this land 10 years ago," Beau said suddenly. "Nothing but a broken-down cabin and 50 acres then. Emily thought I was crazy." Hannah held her breath, afraid to break the spell as he continued. "She was a town girl, schoolteacher. Everyone said she'd never adapt to ranch life." A smile touched his lips. They were wrong. She took to it like she was born to it. Learned to ride, to garden, even helped birth calves that first spring. "She sounds remarkable," Hannah said softly. She was. Beau's hands tightened on the fence post. "When the fever came through, I was up in the mountains tracking a mountain lion that had been taking calves. By the time Miguel found me." He shook his head. "Too late. Always too late." Hannah placed her hand over his. "It wasn't your fault, Beau. Told myself that 1,000 times." His voice was rough with emotion. "Never quite believed it." "I understand," Hannah whispered. "After Abigail died, I kept thinking of all the ways I might have saved her if I'd come sooner. If I'd insisted she return to Boston with me after our parents died." Beau turned his hand beneath hers, interlacing their fingers. "Guilt's a heavy burden to carry alone." "Yes," Hannah agreed, her heart pounding at the simple intimacy of their joined hands. "It is." They stood that way for a long moment, connected by shared grief and something new blossoming between them, something neither was ready to name. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the barn, however, Hannah noticed a rider approaching from the direction of town. Beau tensed beside her. "Get inside," he said tersely. "Now, what is it?" Hannah asked, alarmed by his sudden change in demeanor. "That's Sheriff Davis. And he's not one for social calls." Beau dismounted and helped her from the saddle. Go through the kitchen. Tell Mrs. Hernandez I said to hide you in the root cellar if necessary. Fear clutched at Hannah's heart as she hurried toward the house. From the kitchen window, she watched Beau greet the sheriff. His posture deceptively relaxed, though she could see the tension in his shoulders. Mrs. Hernandez joined her at the window. Trouble? I don't know, Hannah admitted. Beau seems to think so. The housekeeper's dark eyes narrowed. Sheriff Davis is Charles Winslow's cousin by marriage. Not to be trusted. Hannah's blood ran cold. Charles must have sent him looking for me. Come. Mrs. Hernandez took her arm. We prepare, just in case. The older woman led Hannah to the pantry, where she moved aside several sacks of flour to reveal a trapdoor. Root cellar, if needed. Hannah nodded, grateful for the precaution, though she prayed it wouldn't be necessary. She returned to the window, straining to hear the conversation between Beau and the sheriff. Just asking questions. Hawkins, the sheriff was saying, his tone casual but his posture stiff. Winslow's mighty concerned about his sister-in-law. Says she was delicate in the head after her sister's passing. Wandered off 3 weeks ago and hasn't been seen since. Sorry to hear it, Beau replied, crossing his arms. But I don't see what that has to do with me. Word is you brought a woman to Doc Williams in the middle of the night a while back. Same time this Hannah Lawson went missing. Hannah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain Mrs. Hernandez could hear it. Ranch hand got thrown from his horse, Beau said evenly. Knocked himself senseless. Doc patched him up. That right? The sheriff didn't sound convinced. Mind if I have a look around? Just to ease Winslow's mind. Actually, I do mind. Beau's voice hardened. You got a warrant, Sheriff? The two men stared at each other, tension crackling between them. Finally, the sheriff looked away. Don't need one yet, but Winslow's offering a substantial reward for information about his sister-in-law. Folks are talking about a woman staying at your place. People always talk, Beau said dismissively. Doesn't make it true. Maybe not. The sheriff adjusted his hat. But I'll be back, Hawkins, with a warrant next time if needed. You do what you feel you must, Sheriff. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a ranch to run. The sheriff mounted his horse, his expression thunderous. Winslow's not a man you want as an enemy. Neither am I, Beau replied quietly. Something you might want to remember. As the sheriff rode away, Hannah sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. Mrs. Hernandez pressed a glass of water into her hands. Drink, then we make plan. Beau entered the kitchen moments later, his face grim. He'll be back, with reinforcements. I should leave, Hannah said immediately. I've brought enough trouble to your door. No. Beau's tone brooked no argument. Winslow's looking everywhere for you. If you run now, he'll find you. Then what do we suggest? Hannah demanded, frustration and fear making her voice sharp. A slow smile spread across Beau's face, not of amusement, but of determination. We're going to get that journal back. Tonight. The plan was simple, though fraught with danger. Under cover of darkness, Beau and Hannah would ride to Pine Creek. While most of the town slept, they would enter the Winslow house and retrieve Abigail's journal. Then we take it straight to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne, Beau explained as they prepared. Davis may be in Winslow's pocket, but Marshal Jenkins is honest. If the journal contains what you say it does, he'll act on it. Hannah dressed in men's clothing borrowed from Miguel, the pants rolled up several times and cinched tight with a belt, a flannel shirt that hung to her knees, and a battered hat that concealed her hair. The disguise wasn't perfect, but in the darkness, it might be enough to avoid immediate recognition if they were spotted. This is madness, she murmured as Beau checked his revolver before holstering it. I can't ask you to risk your life this way. You didn't ask. Beau's eyes met hers. Some things are worth the risk, Hannah. The ride to Pine Creek was tense, both hyper-aware of every sound in the darkness around them. They left their horses in a stand of trees outside town and proceeded on foot, keeping to shadows and alleyways. Winslow's house stood apart from its neighbors, a grand two-story structure with a wraparound porch and gabled windows. A single lamp burned in a downstairs window. "Someone's still awake," Hannah whispered as they crouched behind a hedge. "Servant, probably," Beau replied. "Where would the journal be?" "Charles has a study on the first floor, but he keeps it locked." Hannah thought for a moment. His bedroom, perhaps. In his desk or a lockbox. Beau nodded. "Second floor. Front of the house, overlooking the street." They circled the property, looking for the safest point of entry. A trellis covered in ivy climbed the back wall, reaching nearly to a second-floor window. "That's the guest room," Hannah said, "where I stayed when I first arrived." "Can you climb in this getup?" Beau asked, eyeing the trellis dubiously. Hannah removed her hat, tucking her hair firmly inside before replacing it. "I climbed trees all over Boston as a girl. This can't be much different." Beau grinned, surprising her. "You're full of surprises, Miss Lawson. As are you, Mr. Hawkins." She took a deep breath. "Let's get this over with." The climb was more difficult than Hannah had anticipated, the wooden trellis creaking ominously under her weight. By the time she reached the window, her arms trembled with exertion. To her relief, the window was unlatched. She slid it open carefully and climbed inside, then leaned out to signal Beau. He scaled the trellis with considerably more grace than she had, his strength making the ascent look effortless. Once inside, they paused to listen. The house was silent save for the ticking of a grandfather clock somewhere below. "Charles's room is down the hall, last door on the right," Hannah whispered. "I'll check there. You take the study downstairs." Beau caught her arm. "Be careful. If he wakes up, I know." Hannah managed a tight smile. "I'll scream loud enough to wake the whole town." They separated, Hannah moving silently down the hallway while Beau descended the stairs. The plush carpet muffled her footsteps as she approached Charles's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of lamplight spilling into the hall. Hannah's heart hammered in her chest as she peered through the gap. The room was empty, the bed neatly made. Relief washed over her, quickly followed by concern. If Charles wasn't in his room at this hour. She slipped inside, scanning the space quickly. A massive four-poster bed dominated the room, flanked by matching bedside tables. Against the far wall stood an ornate desk, its surface neat and organized. Hannah moved to the desk, careful to avoid the floorboards she knew would creak. The drawers were locked, of course. She extracted a hairpin from beneath her hat and bent to the lock, employing a skill her proper Boston upbringing would never have approved of, learned from a stable boy when she was 12. The lock clicked open on her third attempt. Hannah rifled through the contents: business correspondence, property deeds, bank statements. No journal. Frustration mounting, she turned her attention to the wardrobe, then the bedside tables. Nothing. Charles must have hidden it elsewhere or, worse, destroyed it. A sudden noise from downstairs froze her in place. Voices, one of them unmistakably Charles's. Hannah's blood ran cold. He was home, and from the sound of it, not alone. She crept to the door, straining to hear. Charles and another man were in the foyer, their voices growing louder as they approached the stairs. Sure, it was her, the second voice was saying. Hannah recognized it as Sheriff Davis. One of the ranch hands got drunk in town tonight, started talking about Hawkins bringing home a half-drowned woman matching her description. "And you believe this drunk?" Charles sounded skeptical. "Enough to warrant a visit tomorrow, official-like. With a search warrant." Hannah backed away from the door, panic threatening to overwhelm her. Beau was downstairs, possibly trapped, and Charles was coming upstairs. A hand covered her mouth from behind, stifling her scream before it could escape. "It's me," Beau whispered in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Fire escape through the guest room. Now." He released her, and Hannah turned to see him holding Abigail's journal, its leather cover unmistakable even in the dim light. "Where?" "Study. Hidden compartment in the desk." Beau took her hand, pulling her toward the hallway. "We need to move." They had just reached the guest room when they heard Charles's footsteps on the stairs. Hannah's hands shook as she pushed open the window. The climb down seemed infinitely more dangerous than the ascent, especially with Charles mere seconds from discovering their presence. Beau went first, descending quickly before reaching up to help Hannah. She had just swung her leg over the sill when the door to Charles's bedroom slammed open, followed by a bellow of rage. "Someone's been in here," Charles shouted. "Davis, check the house." Hannah scrambled onto the trellis, no longer concerned with stealth. The ivy tore beneath her grasping hands, sending her sliding several feet before she caught herself. Beau stood below, arms outstretched. "Jump!" he called. "I'll catch you." A gunshot exploded above her, with splintering inches from her head as Charles fired from the window. Hannah didn't hesitate, she let go, falling through darkness into Beau's waiting arms. The impact knocked them both to the ground, but Beau was up in an instant, pulling Hannah to her feet. More shouts came from the house as they ran for the tree line, bullets whizzing past them. Their horses nickered nervously as they approached. Beau boosted Hannah into the saddle before vaulting onto his own mount. "Ride!" he commanded, spurring Merlin into a gallop. Hannah followed, bent low over her horse's neck as they thundered away from Pine Creek. They didn't slow until they'd put several miles between themselves and the town. Dawn was breaking on the eastern horizon, pale light seeping into the sky as they finally reined their exhausted horses to a walk. "Did he see you?" Beau asked, his voice tight with concern. Hannah shook her head. "I don't think so, but Davis knows I'm at your ranch. We won't be going back there." Beau patted his saddlebag where the journal was safely stowed. "Not yet, anyway. We'll head straight to Cheyenne." "Beau." Hannah drew her horse alongside his. "You've risked everything for me, your safety, your ranch, your life. Why?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the brightening horizon. When he finally looked at her, the emotion in his eyes took her breath away. "Because from the moment I pulled you from that river, something changed." His voice was rough with feeling. 5 years I've been half alive, Hannah. Then you appeared, and suddenly..." He shook his head, struggling to find the words. "Suddenly I wanted to live again, not just exist." Hannah's heart swelled with emotion. "I was drowning long before I fell into that river," she admitted softly. "Losing Abigail, having no place to belong. I was barely surviving." Beau reached across the space between them, taking her hand. "You belong with me," he said simply. "If you want to." Tears filled Hannah's eyes as she squeezed his hand. "I do want to, more than anything." They rode toward the rising sun, the journal secure and a future suddenly possible. Whatever came next, the marshal's judgment, Charles's retribution, rebuilding their lives, they would face it together. 3 months later, Hannah stood on the porch of Hawk's Ridge Ranch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. So much had changed since that desperate night in Pine Creek. Marshal Jenkins had acted swiftly once presented with Abigail's journal. Charles Winslow now awaited trial for the murder of his wife. The journal had detailed not only his financial crimes but his gradual poisoning of Abigail when she threatened to leave him. Sheriff Davis had been removed from office for his complicity. The ranch had flourished under the combined care of Beau and Hannah. She had discovered a talent for bookkeeping that complemented his skill with the land and animals. Together, they had expanded the operation, purchasing neighboring land that had once belonged to the Winslow estate. "Beautiful evening," Beau said, joining her on the porch. His arms encircled her waist from behind, and she leaned into his solid warmth. "It is," Hannah agreed, placing her hands over his where they rested against her stomach. In another few months, that stomach would begin to swell with their child news they had just received from Doc Williams that morning. "Any regrets?" Beau asked, his chin resting on top of her head. Hannah turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the lines of his face, the face that had become dearer to her than any other in the world. "Only that it took nearly dying for me to find you," she replied with a smile. Beau captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I'd ride through 1,000 foggy nights to find you again." As the last light faded from the sky, Hannah Hawkins stood in her husband's embrace, finally and completely home. The river that had nearly claimed her life had instead carried her to a love she had never imagined possible. And in the quiet moments before sleep each night, she still sometimes heard the words Beau had whispered as he carried her from the water. "You belong to me," words that had become not a claim of possession, but a promise fulfilled of protection, of partnership, of a love that had rescued them both.